Hello, we want to welcome everyone and move towards the launch of our event. So if everyone would please take a seat. Everyone, including Paul Miller and Travis Wusal, if you would take your seat so we can move forward. I have my own affectionate terminology for you, but I'm glad you're here. We welcome to you and welcome to all who are watching us online for the next several hours of intense and provocative conversation about God, America, and nationalism, which of course has been a topic very much part of our national conversation, especially over the last 6 months with the National Conservatism Conference here in Washington, D.C. in July. And of course, ongoing conversation about quote unquote Christian nationalism and of course, white nationalism and nationalism in general. And amid all that conversation, perhaps there's not been enough said through the prism of faith and the ethical resources offered by biblical religion, Christianity, and Judaism. And so here we are today as Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy, to launch into that conversation, featuring some wonderful minds, starting off with Walter Russell Mead of the Hudson Institute and a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. And I like to think of him as offering or representing the best of the vestiges of once great mainline Protestant school of thought in American culture and thought and politics. Walter, of course, was the son of an Episcopal priest. And so I think that there's a wonderful legacy there that still has so much to teach us today. So Walter will speak to us for the next half hour or so, with hopefully some time for questions and comments from you towards the end. And then we'll go into our first panel. But Walter, a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Well, at my age, you get more and more used to being introduced as a living fossil. So here I am, last survivor. We once roamed the country in great herds, but now are found only in a handful of national parks and UNESCO reserves. Talking about God, nationalism and liberalism for an old-time WASP is pretty much, these are all the things you're never supposed to talk about. A list of forbidden topics at my grandmother's dinner table. I am actually kind of wary about conversations like this. These sort of big picture topics, God, nationalism, liberalism, the United States of America. It's very easy when you talk about these things to sound like a fatuous blowhard, and it's also easy to fall into a kind of a cheap cynicism. But more profoundly, what I find is that with many of the most important words in our political language, they mean so many different things to so many different people that it's very hard to have a good discussion about any of them. So if you want to talk about liberalism, the chances, or patriotism or nationalism, the chances are that people are not actually arguing about real things. Each has their own sort of private definition of a certain topic, and you're arguing. So one person saying, I hate nationalism, and another is saying, no, nationalism is great. Then the first person says, well, nationalism is bad, but patriotism is good. Well, patriotism is what the other person means when they say nationalism. And the other person probably uses a word like chauvinism to describe what person A means as nationalism. So these arguments, we're a very disputatious species. We love to argue. And I find, generally speaking, that when I read books and op-eds and so on these topics, it often seems like a certain amount of wasted effort. I mean, everybody here, of course, who's written a book on these topics has avoided all these problems and done it brilliantly. in case you were wondering what I thought. So an argument between, I'll give you an example. Some people might think primarily of anger when they use the word emotion for all kinds of personal reasons. Another might think of sentimentality. The word emotion conjures up sentimentality. For another, it might be aspirations or love. And so when these people are talking about the role of emotions in politics, they're going to be, the conversation will not track. And so I want to try to have a conversation that will track a little bit better. And I thought I would come at this from an angle, trying to stay away a little bit from abstractions, but talking about the ground out of which a lot of these abstractions arise. And the best way to do that, I find, is to talk about what for me is the sort of ground zero for thinking about America, nationalism, liberalism, and God, which would be the words that, like most people in this room, I recited hundreds and maybe thousands of times in school, the Pledge of Allegiance. And let me just remind you, refresh the memory of those of you who don't remember right offhand, or maybe were educated somewhere outside of the United States. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. What does, to me, this is where, my sense of belonging in this country, if I were going to try to articulate it, it flows out of this. And that civic ritual as a child, you put your hand over your heart, you face the flag, and you say these things in the morning. So what do we mean by it? How does that help us maybe reach some kind of a healthy attitude toward these various ideas and abstractions? So the first point to be made is that this Pledge of Allegiance is a kind of a central right of American citizens. If you're going to become a citizen, this is part of the ceremony. And it's interesting that it is a pledge and not a creed. That is, it's not, you don't stand up and say, I believe in the following things. It's not like the Nicene Creed. What it's actually like are baptismal vows or wedding vows. In fact, the word pledge is used in the I pledge my troth, is used in the Book of Common Prayer. And it's so that this central right of citizenship is an act and not a proposition. I think that's actually important. You are an American based on what you do, not whether you think the right thoughts necessarily. But as we look and ask, what is the pledge to? What does this lead us into? I think we begin to see that even though there's not a creed here, there are some values, there are some ideas that are clearly part of this fundamental sense of belonging and citizenship. When you make a pledge of allegiance, you're making a promise. What is it that you're promising? You're promising allegiance. Well, that's not a word we use a lot, but I think we can disentangle three things there. When you have allegiance to someone or something, you promise to adhere, to belong to it. You promise to engage with it, and you promise to uphold it. And so this notion of commitment, I think, is clearly in what it is to be an American. There's a commitment here. To what do we pledge? It's interesting, the Pledge of Allegiance, that I pledge allegiance to, there are two things there, a flag and a republic. Again, this is, how do you pledge allegiance to a piece of cloth? What does that mean? And then what does it mean to pledge allegiance to a republic? I think the choice of the two gives us a richer meaning than we would have if we stuck with if we had just one. A flag is a symbol. A republic is a set of institutions and laws. And I think what we're saying is that America is composed of both of these things. The republic has laws, it has a constitution, it has certain political ideas that are part of it, but the flag is more than simply, a symbol of the Third Amendment to the Constitution or whatever. The flag is a symbol of a community of people. So I think there is in the pledge this sense of a community and a set of institutions and pathways. And the two are connected to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. And that somehow being an American is to accept and pledge allegiance to and be willing to support and engage with a republic, but also to be part of, to care about, to participate in the life of a community. I think this binding together of these two things will turn out to be very important. As to pledging allegiance to a republic, this is, first and foremost, a republic is a state. The word republic comes to English from Latin res publica, the public thing, the state, which is different from cosa nostra, our thing, which has been used by some people who care more about the family than the state. The state, we're pledging allegiance to a state which has laws, which may make demands on us, which requires that we pay taxes, which has institutions. And also, by the way, we don't pledge allegiance to the republic when my party is running it. We pledge allegiance to the republic and the laws and the elections that it has. So someone who has been legitimately elected president of the United States and has not yet been, for example, impeached and removed from office is the legitimate president of the United States. And I may utterly dislike and despise this particular character, but I am bound by my pledge of allegiance to respect the laws of the republic that put him or her in that spot. That doesn't mean I can't use the laws of the republic to get rid of them, but it's under the law. So our pledge to a state, and for some people, I think, who tend to put a very high value on kind of, on morality over institutions, this is a little problematic. But we're saying, no, the organized political life of this community and the laws that it enacts and the magistrates that it selects, these are deserving of our respect, obedience, and we say allegiance, and that is a real thing. Right? To be an American involves respect for the republic. G.K. Chesterton, of course, once wrote that my country, right or wrong, is like saying my mother drunk or sober. But as Chesterton himself certainly knew, she is still your mother, whether she's drunk or whether she's sober. And the republic, drunk or sober, we have pledged allegiance to. The rest of the pledge, I pledge allegiance to the flag, to the republic for which it stands. We now get into kind of the fine print, explicating what we mean by that flag and that republic. And first thing that comes up is one nation. So again, we're saying something positive about this community that the flag is the symbol of, and that the republic is not just simply an abstract republic or set of laws. There's a nation here. The American people constitute a nation. That is, that was often doubted by people who wondered about different waves of immigrants. Are these people, they're the real Americans who came over on the Mayflower, and then they're the hyphenated Americans who came from other places. And this both historically, in terms of the construction, the writing of the pledge, and in terms of its meaning, saying that the American people are one nation is an attack on this idea that some people are more American than others, or that certain ethnic or racial heritages are legitimately American, others are not. Now, the meaning of the Pledge of Allegiance here is if you pledge allegiance, you're a member of the American nation, and you have every bit as much right to be a member of that nation as anybody else. You also, by the way, have the same duty to be a member of that nation as anybody else. So this is a special kind of nation. It's not quite creedal because the Pledge of Allegiance is not a creed. But it's not tribal in the sense that you're not, you don't automatically join it by bloodline. There are laws in some countries that if your ancestors lived in that country 300 years ago, you can still claim citizenship in that country if you can demonstrate your relationship. We don't have that. So the American people are not a tribe bound by blood, but neither are they simply a group of people who share a common ideology. There is a nation, but we define our nation in a different way from most nations. I won't say it's entirely unique because many countries have, there are a lot of different countries with different patterns, but this is ours. And so the American nation is real. It's a thing. And it's okay to like it and be for it. In fact, you're pledging allegiance to it, so you'd better be. But at the same time, it is not a cult of blood. It is not a cult of race. And anybody who thinks that is actually deviating from the path of what it means to be an American. There's another way that this one nation cuts against some fashionable ideologies even of today, and that is it's asserting that no matter your race, no matter your gender, you're an American, which is that the divisions among us, and the divisions among Americans are real and deep, are not so deep that they break our nation. The Mexican-American in Texas is an American, so is the descendant of the Alamo fighter. And there may be cultural and historical and religious differences, but we're asserting that what makes the American nation is something that is stronger than those differences between the descendant of slaves and the descendant of slave holders. We are one nation. And this suggests, again, we all need to be making a commitment to explore, discover, celebrate, and act on the commonalities that exist among the American people. Okay, now we come to the most controversial phrase in the pledge, which is the last added phrase in the pledge, under God. And this was actually added in 1954, officially added by act of Congress. So by act of Congress, this nation is under God. And ever since, there have been some people saying this is a kind of a violation of the separation of church and state, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody cooks up a good lawsuit. Maybe they already have on this. I certainly, don't think there should be any kind of religious test whatever for holding office in the American Republic. What we have is a secular republic for a religious people, and I hope that both sides of that will long be true, that our republic will remain secular and open to all, and that our people, out of their free choice, not of any external force or pressure, will choose to become and remain religious. I think those two things together I think a secular republic with a completely secular people would probably not do well, and I think a religious republic would not be an improvement over what we've got. So secular republic for religious people. And this, in saying this, I'm speaking for the overwhelming majority, certainly American Christians over the centuries, who have, rather than having the secular republic sort of imposed on them by a secular party, freely chose to uphold the secularity, the neutrality of the state, even when religious people were overwhelming majorities in the United States. So to say that we are under God then, I hear this less as a kind of like, celebration of religious power in America, as more a warning of the limits and an acceptance of the limits of any republic. One of the classic arguments that illiberal religious people have made against the idea of liberal democracy is this idea, well, there is a natural law, there is God's law, and so does a republic, by the will of the voters, have the right to overturn God's laws or to act in kind of open defiance of God's laws? And by putting under God in the pledge, I think we're saying, America recognizes that there is a morality superior to the will of the nation, that our nation does not exist, is not the head of the universe, the chief sort of goal of morality or judge of morality. We are not Nietzscheans, we are not Nazis. We do not worship the state, the republic, or the nation as an idol. Our allegiance to the nation under God is sort of saving, divine. There are limits to our allegiance to the United States. And there are some things that if the state were to go in certain directions, American citizens would have the right, the duty to say, not here. I did not sign up for this when I pledged allegiance. Now, we don't do that lightly. We don't sort of, say, well, you're delivering the mail on the Sabbath, and I consider that an abomination, so I'm not paying my income tax. It's not that sort of level, but fundamentally, the government of the United States, we acknowledge, is under moral judgment by higher law. That also, by the way, implies that the United States is one among many nations or states. And the idea that there is a higher judge of the United States says that this community is also a community where laws are observed that are not necessarily those of the United States by its own legislation, but through nature. So international law, as far as this is also reflective of some kind of higher justice or natural state, can be part of our allegiance to the United States. So again, I do not see this under God pledge as an illiberal element in the Pledge of Allegiance. It's a little bit like the finger of Thomas à Becket wagging at Henry II and saying there is a higher law. The king's will does not govern all good and evil. The king is governed too. And with liberty and justice for all. This is language to me that is both descriptive and aspirational. That is, insofar as we've been able to do it, the laws, the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence are built on ideas of human equality before the law, and that liberty is something that is not a gift of the state, but is a gift of our Creator that the state recognizes and seeks to preserve. So that in that sense, the republic and the flag are grounded in these ideas of liberty and equality before the law, but at the same time, the writers of the pledge and the reciters of the pledge have always understood that that America as it is not the full, total embodiment of these high ideals. So there's a sense in which in the Pledge of Allegiance, you're also pledging to work to make the United States better. The United States is pointed toward goals that we haven't yet achieved, and it's our job as loyal citizens, as loyal members of the American nation, to help our nation move forward along this path. So I see this Pledge of Allegiance, which one thoughtlessly recites as a school child, to be actually a very profound statement about what kind of country this is, what the meaning of the American nation is, what American nationalism is, and what the relationship of all of this to the ideas of God and religious truth are. I think in many ways, a lot of our contemporary controversies over some of these values are actually anticipated and responded to here in the Pledge of Allegiance, that it kind of points to a path that maybe can help guide us through some of these perplexities. I guess the final thing I should probably say here is that the notion that that this is something that you join, that you can come to join, and that anybody can join, is aligned to something that the American nation was pluralistic from the beginning. That is, when you see the Revolutionary War, and you see people of different religions, different races. I mean, the first integrated institution in the United States was the Continental Army, where African Americans were fighting as free soldiers. Now, at the same time in that army, George Washington and other Southern officers brought their personal slaves with them. I don't think there are many other examples of armies of that nature, that diversity. But in any case, the American nation is not a unitary idea. In that sense, I mean, I don't want to be blasphemous here, and I'm certainly not trying to suggest that we worship it. But if we think of, sort of the Christian idea of the Trinity, where God's unity at the core is there are three persons in the unity of the divine nature, that in the heart of the American nation, there is difference and there is diversity. And it's it's a tribe of tribes right down to the very seed of our country. Okay. Let me just end with a prayer that is in the Book of Common Prayer, and that I think was written at a time when Americans, or close to the time the Pledge of Allegiance was written, at a time when Americans were worried about the strength of the unity of the country and whether this old-fashioned idea of America could last. And I think the prayer in some ways is a good complement to the Pledge of Allegiance. So let me leave you with this, and then we can, if there's time, we can have some questions. Almighty God, who has given us this good land for our heritage, we humbly beseech Thee that we may always prove ourselves a people mindful of Thy favor and glad to do Thy will. Bless our land with honorable industry, sound learning, and pure manners. Save us from violence, discord, and confusion, from pride and arrogance in every evil way. Defend our liberties, and fashion into one united people the multitudes brought hither out of many kindreds and tongues. Endue with the spirit of wisdom those to whom in Thy name we entrust the authority of government, that there may be justice and peace at home, and that through obedience to Thy law we may show forth Thy praise among the nations of the earth. In the time of prosperity, fill our hearts with thankfulness, and in the day of trouble, suffer not our trust in Thee to fail. I think there is an idea in the United States of unity in diversity, of freedom conjoined to respect for divine law, universal justice. I think we can find our way through it, and some of the divisions and passions that one hears today, I think, are often quarrels about words more often than they're quarrels about real things. Anyway, thank you very much.